All right, everybody. Welcome to the Applied Leadership Podcast. My name's Blayne. This is my partner, Brandon, and we are here every week to answer your questions about leadership, life, management, you name it. Our goal is to have a free-flowing, honest conversation about things that you're thinking about out there in the world. We'll share any stories or anecdotes that are appropriate from our perspective, and we'll just try to have some fun with this. Brandon, how are you doing today?
I am great. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. It's Thursday afternoon. I think we both have good Friday afternoons planned. So let's see if we can get some work done and get ourselves out the door this week. How's that sound?
I'm in. I'm good. I got the incline queued up tomorrow, so let's just get to it.
Just one lap up the incline in Manitou Springs, or multiple laps?
I'm just doing one. Yeah. Don't you put that on me.
I'm just trying to plant that seed in your head there.
I'll think about it.
All right, cool. Yeah. Well, we've got a good question, a juicy one to dive in here in episode 1. And it is, what is one mistake you've made during your career that you wish you could go back and fix or do over? And I just want to caveat this by saying I take exception to the question because there's far more than one mistake, I think, for both of us. So we might dip into more than one here, but maybe we'll just start with one each. And we'll kind of see where it goes. So, Brandon, maybe let's start with you. What's one mistake you wish you could go back and redo?
Yeah, thanks, partner. It's, this reminds me is when we first started Applied Leadership Partners, we had shared with people that, we have about 25 years each of leadership and special operations, corporate America, startups, social impact, and all that. And that we felt like the real need to share some hard-won wisdom with others in terms of leadership. And we realized pretty quickly that was a real misnomer, because a lot of our lessons in leadership came from a lot of losses, a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors. And so we we promptly changed that to a lot of hard-earned wisdom in leadership. And like you said, you take exception because one question, one situation, oh boy, that wouldn't even be enough. We could fill about 1,000 podcasts with those. I'll just speak for myself, but I think about the impact of culture is incredible. So much has been written about it. How powerful culture is within organizations, within any organization, any team trying to do great things. And you and I are real big culture nerds, so. That's pretty cool. And I think what is something that I remember very much is that sometimes, culture can have its dark sides. There are some of these nascent cultural aspects that emerge within organizations. I think Pat Lencioni does a really great job talking about that in The Advantage. And what's really interesting is that sometimes these things develop and they're not super helpful, but yet they are very much planted in the culture. So, I became a Ranger in 1998. I joined the Army in the fall of 97, went through all the, the stuff, and I showed up to the 2nd Ranger Battalion. And I didn't really even know this at the time, but in the late 90s in the Ranger Regiment, there was a real big problem with a culture of hazing and harassing, and I understand where it all came from. It all comes from a good place. If Rangers are expected to go further, faster, and fight harder than any other soldier, then you would expect that there's going to be, a lot of grit and determination, a lot of challenge and all that kind of stuff. Well, long story short, by the time that I had actually become a leader, that's what I knew, right? I got the smokings all the time, and and I shouldn't exaggerate this too much. I got smoked. Everybody got smoked, but I had great leaders also who really, invested in me and all that kind of stuff. And so they sent me to Ranger School. I come back from Ranger School, and now all of a sudden I'm in charge of a team. And, I was spitting fire.
Tables have turned.
Tables have turned. Yeah. Who's got the tab on their shoulder now? And, I just didn't handle it well, to be honest with you. Like I think part of it was the culture, because I thought I was doing what I was supposed to be doing, because that's what was modeled, for me. But that's not all of it. The truth is that, like part of it was also like I was a really angry guy, and I was a young man with power, and I did not use that power well. And so I ended up getting in trouble after a real kind of like, apex event, so to speak.
A peak hazing experience.
A peak hazing experience by which I was the deliverer of the hazing, and this young man ended up going AWOL. Congressional investigation got started. All of these things, and we would say. Back in those days that, you're not a real leader in the battalion until you have your first Article 15, which is, if for those who are not familiar, it's a minor form of punishment under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, as opposed to a court-martial. And I got one. I got an Article 15. And looking back, that's another cultural allegory right there, right? That is, frankly, ridiculous. Those are the kind of things that were said. It took me a lot of eating humble pie, Mr. Big bad team leader, gun team leader, ranger guy got his gun taken away from him, got his team taken away from him, and was mopping the floors, of the company for 14 days. And I couldn't go anywhere for 14 days, and I deserved it. And I'll tell you what is, there's a lot of lessons for me in that. And one of them is this. Sometimes those nascent cultural factors that we know are living in the organization but aren't super healthy. Like, I wish that I would have had the courage actually to do something about it, to change it. Yeah. It didn't have to be that way. Not everyone was doing it that way, but the overwhelming majority were. And even my company at the time, I think, was known for being, just too much. We called it Alphatraz, right? ACO 275. And in the late 90s. So that's one of the things that I kind of take away from that. The other thing is just not getting swept up in it. Another thing is challenging those norms. And I want to actually like pull it forward into, so what do you do with that, right? What did you learn? And there were a lot of great leaders that were around me at the time who really invested in me. They saw like, hey, this guy's got something. I know he's a bit of a mouthy spitfire, and I was.
Not the only one at 275.
Not the only. No, not the only mouthy spitfire, hard charging, airborne ranger. But one person that I really want to call out is a man who is a Ranger legend. He's a Ranger Hall of Famer, Hugh Roberts. And Hugh Roberts was the command sergeant major by the time that I had become a buck sergeant, and I had a team, and I was about to get out of the Army. And, you get the customary sergeant major who calls you into the office and be like, no, come on, and in his Brooklyn accent, come on, bud, why are you getting out of the Army? This is what he would talk like, and
it's not bad.
Yeah. And I would say every other week for a couple months, I would just spend hour and a half with Sergeant Major Roberts, and he mentored me. And I shared with him things like, I screwed it up. I screwed up this opportunity to do something great and to learn to be a great leader, by getting in trouble, hazing and harassing. And, he just reminded me, like, that's not true. Like, we all fall down. It's what we do when we get back up and get back to it that makes the difference. And you can, learn to lead. You can, do it a different way. You don't have to ever do it again the way that you did it before. At that point in time, I think I'd been in the Army for 3 years and some change. And that was a pivotal conversation for me. I would go on to re-enlist a couple more times. I ended up doing a full 11 years, 9 of which in the regiment. I went from private to sergeant first class in the regiment. And had Hugh Roberts not invested in me, I would have taken that mistake, that black mark, as this is the scarlet letter H of hazing that's just going to stay on my chest for the rest of the time, and it wasn't true.
Yeah, That reminds me a lot of what Stan McChrystal said in his first TED Talk about great leaders have the ability to let people know when they failed without making them feel like a failure. And I think that's a big part of, especially bringing young leaders into the front. One of the, you and I spent a lot of time with frontline leaders and frontline managers and people that are kind of in their first or second real kind of management or leadership job. And they're going to mess some things up. We all are, but certainly when you're first kind of cutting your teeth, you're gonna fall down. You're gonna make mistakes, and their leader's ability to bring them along and point those things out, but kind of nudge them in the right direction and letting them know it's a natural part of the process, I think is super important. That's a good story. I never get tired of hearing that one.
Yeah. What about you? What's one of your classic leadership gaffes?
Yeah, well, there's a lot of data to sort through here, but I think maybe to complement yours a little bit, I'll use one. It's a bit of a transitional leadership story as well. That's a bit more broad. And when I was out on the civilian side, I think a lot about my first couple 3 years as the executive director at Team RWB and how different the leadership required to be good in that role was than everything else I'd ever done. And it was really just kind of figuring it out and screwing it up as I went in a lot of cases, partly because it started off as I was the only full-time employee, and then it was 2, then 4, and then it kind of continued to grow until it was 30-something, after a few years. And so that dynamic was always changing. And part of it was because it was a completely distributed team. And so I'd grown up, leading most of my life, but in these very intimate, sort of high-intensity ways. So whether it was on a soccer field or in a tank platoon or a special forces team, it was always very much, I could put my hand on your shoulder and I could look you in the eye, and we could share a lot of time together and get to know one another. And so for me, leadership in that environment felt pretty comfortable. And now this was, a lot of email and, Google Hangouts. We were kind of doing Zoom way before it was cool.
Way before it was cool.
Yeah. And figuring out how to communicate and lead and motivate people in ways that, just were not comfortable, or at least certainly I wasn't accustomed to, at least. And I can think of lots of examples of where I was doing things, or in some cases not doing things, that I thought was totally cool because that probably fit my personality. But once you've got 10, 12, 15 people on the team, you've got to take a broader look at who you've got and what they need. And I can think about, having things like an unlimited PTO policy, which I just thought, we're a startup, there's no reason we can't do this, let's do it. And it wasn't until a couple years later, I looked in the numbers, and it turns out nobody was taking vacation. Yeah. And I was like, what the heck is going on here? Why is no one taking vacation? And I read up on it a little bit. Actually, Andrew Hutchinson, Hutch is clutch, as we like to say, sent me an article about how unlimited PTO policies are usually very underutilized, and you should have something that's generous but not unlimited, and so on. And I was like, dude, I didn't know that. I didn't even think about it. I noticed that after a couple of years, a lot of people would say that they had gained, 5 or 10 or 15 pounds after working at Team RWB for a year. And I was like, that is totally antithetical to what we're trying to do here. You should be taking time and investing in your fitness and having a flexible schedule. But people cared so much about the mission, and there were so few kind of clear boundaries between life and work. People were just working all the time. And again, I just wasn't as aware of that as I should have been, or as clear about how that should work. And so, we started doing things like putting everything on your calendar was sort of a rule. Like on my calendar was my, picking up kids from school, yoga, CrossFit, all of that was on my calendar to try to be a good leader from the front in that way. And just tons of things. Feedback was another thing. Like a lot of people that have grown up the way I have, or maybe have my personality, think you get a good person on the team, you give them some initial direction, and they just kind of want you out of their hair. Just, go execute, crush it. And not everyone's like that, as it turns out. A lot of people wanted a lot more feedback than I was giving them. And there were people that were doing a great job that were not sure whether or not they were doing a great job because I wasn't giving them enough interaction. So I would say that whole first 2 to 3 years of being in that seat was just kind of one thing after another, learning how to be a leader in a remote environment, leading people that were volunteers and, had sort of a different role within the organization, and leading different personalities. I mean, it's just so different. And I certainly haven't figured all that stuff out at this point, but I feel like I could probably point to 7 or 8 right off the top of my head things like that, where I learned a really important lesson that still works today that I didn't even anticipate having to deal with when I was like, oh, great, everyone can work from home, have a flexible schedule, work out on the clock, take unlimited PTO, everyone's smart, we're going to crush it. And it turns out like, no, here's the upshot. What I learned. If you are a leader and you are in charge, your people want you to lead them. And no matter how smart and capable they are, even if they're smarter and more capable than you, which in that case, that was true, they still want you to provide, very clear purpose, direction, motivation, as we learned back in the Army. And like, you don't get a day off from that. You really have to do it all the time.
I've heard you say a number of times, people kind of share the old, I just hire great people and I get out of their way. I just get out of their way. And I've seen you, kind of put your hand on that leader's shoulder in many conference rooms and look them in the eye and say, like, that's not a good approach.
That's a bad strategy. And I know from personal experience.
Yeah, your people want to be led by you, actually, and that doesn't mean it's heavy-handed. Another thing that I really think is appropriate to kind of linger on, especially in this, day and age, we say in gist all the time, although it is true that, we've been Zooming before Zoom was cool because we've done this distributed workforce gig since 2012, 2013, for a long time now. But you mentioned something there that I think is really important for us to kind of hover on, and that's how important it is to set boundaries and how difficult it can be to set boundaries, professional boundaries for yourself when you're working in a remote environment. And to a person, every leader we talk to, who has made in some manner or fashion this transition has happened. It's here to stay, right? We all went through COVID. We all figured out how to do this whole distributed workforce thing, or virtual, more I should say. And really, most companies are in some kind of a mixture of remote, part come in the office. It's here to stay, right? And to a person, when we ask them what is the biggest challenge that you're having with that, what do they tell us? They tell us
blurring of the lines.
Yeah, blurring the lines. It's hard to know when to stop it, right? It's hard to know when to walk away. And I'm sitting down in this office here. I can't tell you how many, 11 o'clock at night grants that I wrote from this desk right here, and because I didn't know how to turn it off. And especially when you care so much about a mission, when your heart's really invested in it, when you really care, it's really hard to turn it off.
Yeah, I find it so interesting that a lot of managers are concerned, understandably, that in the remote work environment, that they want to know, how do I make sure my people are doing their job? Which I think there are some practical ways to do that, certainly, but that's just not been what we've seen. And maybe we're lucky just to work with great people, but we've seen far more of people not being able to turn it off, and they're just doing their job all the time. We see a lot of that. We don't see very much people are hiding out and not doing their job while they're at home. They may have Sports Center on in the background or take the dog for a walk on a 20-minute break, but they're still getting their work done. And in many cases, their work days are starting earlier and ending later. So I don't want to go off on a whole tangent about remote work right now, but I do think, having had a lot of experience with this, it really comes down to, what is your connection to your people? Are you providing clear guidance? Are you staying in touch with them? Mm-hmm. Are you allowing them to set clear boundaries? And are you leading by example in all of those things? And if so, I think you're probably fine.
Yeah, I think so too. It's, it's funny. I think about, again, just a tactical thing, and something that I struggle with very much is getting things on the calendar. So when you think about, what's a common kind of gaffe that I tend to fall into, and I keep trying to learn over and over again, that calendar management aspect of things, or just not putting something on the calendar, even if it's like a to be determined, like, hey, TBD, I think we're going to be out in Kalamazoo in August. Let me just put this TBD on the calendar, and I can come back to it. If it doesn't end up panning out, so be it. It doesn't end up panning out, but I can come back to it. it just blends so well with the idea of how important it is in a remote environment. Like, just get this stuff on your calendar, even if it's I'm picking up Penny from school this afternoon, or I'm taking Ellie out to Chick-fil-A for lunch. I think I popped that on my calendar a week or two ago because, she's home from college and I only have a couple weeks left with her. But just one of those things, like, it's so difficult.
Yeah, that's a big mistake I made in my professional career and continue to make in smaller degrees now, is that if there's white space on my calendar, that it's available. And that's turns out not to be true. I mean, we have a lot of things to do with regard to getting work done and being productive that falls outside the realm of having meetings. And I mean, I used to think that, if I didn't have an active meeting in that 1 hour block or 30-minute block on my calendar, then it was available and free to give away. And I spent years literally just giving away my time on my calendar like it was free chicken to anybody who wanted to have a meeting with me about anything. And I was not nearly discerning enough about, first of all, what I was spending my time on with regard to all these calls and meetings, and versus kind of delegating them or saying no thank you right now or whatever. And making sure that I blocked time on my calendar that said, like, this is work time, or I'm working on a project in this window. And so making sure my calendar is more fully filled out with things other than just meetings has been a big part of helping me, make sure not only am I doing, the family stuff and all these other things, but that I'm actually getting work done and not just having meetings all day, every day, which I think a lot of people right now are coming to us with, and they're just saying, like, hey, I'm basically like 8:30 to 5:30, just Zoom after Zoom, and I'm lucky if I get a chance to pee and grab a sandwich. And it's like, whew. I realize not everyone has as much control over their calendars as maybe you and I do, but I would certainly encourage everybody to try to take at least a little bit more control over it, because that one beat me up pretty good for a while there.
Yeah, it reminds me of the policy that we put in place in those days at Team Red, White, and Blue, where we said 45 minutes a meeting. Give everybody at least that 15-minute window, and they got to start at the top of the hour. So give everyone that 15-minute window to just get up and move around, stretch, go to the bathroom if you got to go to the bathroom. Slam a PB&J. Do what you.
Why are you bringing that up, Brandon?
I mean, today was PB&J day. You slammed a PB&J before this, and somehow I managed to scarf down a Larabar in the same amount of time. Look at us. This is exactly what we're talking about.
You win the nutrition battle on that one, but mine was probably more delicious.
I'm giving you the taste battle, though, on that one for sure. So I wonder, as we kind of round the corner here, like, what would you, if you could, like, take the time machine and transport back in time, to that 2014, 2013, 2015 time frame, what would you tell your younger self as a leader as it relates to this? To the topic of, people want to be led by you. Yeah.
I think some of it would be a bit of a pep talk, to be honest. And this might sound silly, but even though I had been, a Green Beret in the Army, and I'd done well in corporate America, this is my first time, like, being an executive director or CEO. And the people we had on that team, as you'll recall, were very impressive, very capable people. And it was intimidating to try to be a leader in that environment. And I think probably what I would have done is just gotten in my ear and said, hey, you're here for a reason. These folks need you. You know what you're doing. Lean into this, do your best, don't hold back. And I think there were plenty of times when I didn't do as good a job as I should have done as a leader because I was afraid of being arrogant or, a micromanager, God forbid, some of those things. And I probably should have actually been more assertive and more confident. And I'll tell you, guys like Jake Wood at Team Rubicon, who was a contemporary at the time, and Jason McCarthy at GoRuck, who was another kind of contemporary at the time, those were guys that I looked to and had conversations with, and I really admired the way that they were very involved in their mission, very good to their people, very in touch with what was going on, and still very, very confident and sometimes very demanding when they needed to be with their people. And I still struggle with that a little bit, but that was something I needed to tap into more and probably a lot earlier.
Yeah.
What about you? I mean, we can go all the way back to 1998, 99 if you want, but pick a time frame and whisper something in your ear as a leader that you wish you'd known at any point along the journey.
Well, first of all, I would tell myself to calm down. I mean, honestly, like,
stand down, Ranger Young.
Yeah,
You got
I mean,
time.
yeah, I mean, I really think, you know, you learn really young in that environment. When in charge, be in charge. You learn, this is something we've been talking about with some of our clients right now. You learn the Fallout 1 drill, right? You learn that when a key leader goes down, you better be ready to pick up the radio and drive on. And so all that, when in charge, be in charge stuff. I probably would have whispered in my ear, and your team knows you're in charge, so you can take it down a couple of notches. You don't have to play at 11, so to speak, every day. You can at least bring it down to 10, if not 7 or 8. And look, that kind of intensity is a hallmark of the Ranger community, and I certainly don't poo-poo that. Like, I think it's an honor to be a part of that, but I think that just as much as I would have told myself, like, yo, calm down a little bit, like, breathe, relax, I also would have reminded myself, you know what, you didn't like this when you were on the receiving end of it. And it certainly didn't bolster your passion for wanting to be a Ranger. And it certainly didn't increase your desire to belong to this, coveted brotherhood. And so why are you doing it?
Yeah.
You're not getting anything out of it. Nobody's getting anything out of it. Why are you doing it? And it's a question that we ask people all the time. How's it working out for you? Not very well. Not very well. I'm kind of seen as a jerk because I kind of am a jerk. And, the last thing I would say, because I would have a mouthful for myself, is you need to go deal with whatever that is that's burning, a fire that is burning a hole inside your heart right now. Because it's actually got nothing to do with these, brothers to your left and your right.
Yeah, that's great, man. I think one of the things, maybe we'll just wrap it up on this, that every leader can do for their people is to make sure they're taking care of themselves. And you got to get yourself right every now and then, and that way you can put your best foot forward for your folks. Brandon, this has been fun, man. I'm glad we've got this kicked off. I'm looking forward to doing this on the regular with you. I think we're going to get a lot of great questions. For those of you listening and watching on YouTube, please send us any questions you have about leadership, management. Let us know what's going on in your world. We'd love to read those. We'd love to answer them. So please send them our way. This has been great. And so for me and for Brandon,
you can send them, by the way, to contact@appliedleadershippartners.com.
We promise we'll read all of them. We'll respond to you, and we'll get as many of them on the show as we can. All right. Until next time, we'll see you soon.
Later.